Yeah, I think Kathy's in this position not because she's a comedian. Maybe she's good at some other stuff. But thank you for having me here. Confessions of an Entrepreneur. I love the title of this because I think majority of the time entrepreneurs like to just talk about maybe the good stuff, the things that are going really well, and then, there's some bad things going on, but we don't need to talk about that. I think Confessions, you think of just talking through some of the things you don't want people to know, or like, we messed up here, but no one needs to know that. So I think this is really cool format and to be able to go through this. So Kathy and I talked through a little bit about what this was going to look like and how the flow of this was going to go. I don't mind up here talking for 2 days straight if you want me to. I think that might be a little boring. So we wanted this to be a little bit more interactive, like a Q&A style. And so what I'll do is kind of tell a little bit about how I got started, my journey up until, we started escape rooms, kind of touch on some of the other businesses that we've invested in or partnered with and started. And then while I'm talking and telling y'all that, if anything comes to mind as a question, we'll kind of throw it out to the audience. Y'all can raise your hand and ask me whatever you want, right? It's confessions, so this doesn't leave this room, right? Okay, it does. So we can go through that, and then I think hopefully have a fruitful conversation. So quick story about me. Grew up on the West Coast. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, is where I'm from and grew up. When I was looking at colleges, did not have Baylor on my radar any way, shape, or form. I had never been to Texas. I wanted to either stay on the West Coast or go to the East Coast. That was the two options. Looked at a ton of schools, and Baylor, again, just nowhere near it. I'm old. My freshman year here was 2006. So backing up a little bit before that, there was this scandal where the basketball player had killed the other basketball player, and the coach covered it up, and all this bad stuff. And that's what I saw on Sports Center. Like, that was my only thing about Baylor, was this like awful deal that happened, and their basketball team couldn't go to the tournament, and their football team wasn't good. And I'm like, who would go to that university? So my senior year in high school, I was a part of a marketing team in high school where we pitched a business. We built it. We had a marketing plan. It was a fake business, but our team had made it to nationals, and that was in Dallas. And so we flew to Dallas, and my mom had convinced me, let's go look at Baylor. She had grown up as a pastor's kid, knew Baylor was a faith-based university, all these great things about it. I, again, didn't want to come look, but we had an off day, toured Baylor, and just was blown away. Like the campus, and we looked at a lot of schools around the country, and Baylor just stuck out. Walking around, talking to professors, the tour guide I had, the business school at the time, which was not as cool as this business school, still was enough to pull me away from a school that I was committed to out in California. Said, I'm not going there, I'm coming to Baylor. And so I had one other friend growing up. He was coming to Baylor too, so I wasn't alone, right? Like, I'm coming to the middle of the country by myself. It was a little daunting. So with him, it gave me a little security. So came to Baylor, and that's kind of where the journey of all this started. I started as a business major. Could not for the life of me pass accounting. It was awful. Financial accounting kicked my butt. I had, it was like a 92% economics and a straight F in accounting, literally the same semester. So I failed it. I took it again. I failed it again. And then my dad was like, look, I don't think this is for you. When you start a business, whatever it is, you'll just hire an accountant, right? Just go with the CPA, trust them, because you would not be very good at keeping your own books. I was like, okay, I'm with you. So actually graduated with a degree in film and communications. It was pretty much one of the degree tracks that I was like, okay, I could maybe enjoy this, and it wasn't going to prolong my time at Baylor. I could still graduate in 4 years. So I was like, I'm going that route. Graduated, ended up staying for grad school, did a master's in sports management. Thought at the time, if I don't start a business, I want to go work for the Portland Trailblazers, an NBA team in Portland. I'll sell sponsorships and do ads and all these different things. And so that was the career track. So keep that in mind. So I moved back to Portland to pursue that career. Amongst that time, a little bit about my family. So only child, Mom and dad, really close-knit, the three of us. And my dad, traditional, worked 9 to 5. He's had the same job for over 30 years. He goes to downtown Portland, comes back home, and lives that life, and he loves that. Mom, she was the entrepreneur. I mean, Mom had started multiple businesses, always was selling something, vendor shows, event planning, and being the only child, daycare was so much cheaper just running around with Mom, right? So I was always like her unpaid intern, right? Going to anything, carrying stuff in, talking to customers. I got to sell my own little whatever gadgets and things as a kid. And so being around Mom was always like, oh, this is I like this lifestyle. This is really cool. Like what dad does is fine. But my mom, like, I want to go down this road. So that's really where my love of entrepreneurship and talking with people and starting a business and all those things really was formed. And so now fast back forward to graduation. I'm in Portland. I'm job hunting. The way the internship programs we usually work in pro sports, you have this very small window where you apply, you get hired, hopefully, and it's always unpaid, and then you do your internship. If you miss that window, you pretty much have to wait until the next season or their next opening. So I had missed that window, and I was waiting, working for a company, just filling the time, and my mom got sick, and she got diagnosed with liver cancer, and it was bad. I mean, it wasn't a good diagnosis. Had some last really good months with her, but it digressed pretty quickly, and so she passed away in 2015. Early February, March 2015, it was just like, whoa, like life just threw a big curveball. We're a close family, and my dad went back to work, and that was good. He could get that routine back. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and so it was just really, I always tell people, it was like being kind of the zombie mode almost, like wake up, would go through the day, go to bed, rinse and repeat, and so I was like looking for some work, but I think I wasn't ready to kind of get back into life yet, and so was searching a little bit. And so my best friend at the time, he's still my best friend, he didn't die or anything, but he had started an escape room in Jackson, Tennessee, on campus. So it was not a business at the time, but the university had reached out to him and said, hey, we want to come up with creative ideas to raise scholarship funds. It's a small university in Jackson, Tennessee. It's called Union University. And they knew Jared, he's a big gamer, he loves game theory, he's super creative, and so they said, hey, we're gonna give you a budget, it was like $250, and they said, do these escape room things, here's some students, he had a staff under him of student workers, so they built out what was at the time 4 rooms on campus in one of the buildings that they weren't using these rooms, so built out these 4 random rooms. Escape rooms were very new at this period of time. I mean, this was 2014, 2015, so not really as many as there are now, but Nashville, which is not too far from Jackson, is kind of like the unofficial capital of escape rooms, at least in the United States. And so they started them, and the thing they did was only promoted it to students. They didn't worry about the city of Jackson, because who's gonna come play these escape rooms? Like, no one's gonna do this. So it was just students. It was $5 a person. And it happened. So it went 2 weekends. He was just keeping me posted. He was like, this is kind of fun. Well, he called me after it was over. He's like, hey, I'm going to email you this Excel sheet. Can you look at it? I think the data is really interesting. And I was like, okay. And Jared knew I wanted to do a business and had background in sales and things like that and management. So I was like, okay, I'll take a look at it. And it was pretty much 78% of all their players were Jackson residents, their families, kids, high schoolers. And they did no marketing, right? Like, how did they find out? It was just this pure organic word of mouth, and he found that all these people wanted something to do. They just activities and things to do with family, corporate outings, like there just wasn't enough in Jackson. And Jackson is smaller than Waco. It's much smaller than Waco, but it's similar because it's this in-between city. It's an hour and a half to Nashville, hour and a half to Memphis, similar to Waco, right? Austin and Dallas. So Jared said, hey, I think we should do one in Waco, and I think you should move back. Like, you need a change in your life. You're just kind of going through the motions. I think this would be something fun. I think it would be successful. We'll make some money. It'll get you out of your rut. And so that's what we ended up doing. I had saved up. I was really burning through my savings because I wasn't working. I had about $10,000 left. And so my dad said, hey, like, I give you my blessing. Go back to Waco. Go start this thing. And the thing that he told me, and I was telling the folks this earlier at lunch, is like, when you start a business, I think a lot of people get consumed with capital, and we need capital, and we got to raise capital. We need enough runway, 6 months, a year, 2 years of operations. Like we need the capital. And at the time, what my dad said wasn't capital, right? I had my little 10,000. Jared and we had another partner at the time brought about 30 to the table, so we had 40 combined. But my dad was like, "Hey, if this fails, we know all the statistics, right, about business, like in small business and entrepreneurship. A lot of them fail. The first one, it's rough to get through." He was like, "If this fails, and when it fails, was kind of his attitude. You can come back home, right? Like if you sign a lease, we'll get you out of the lease. If you're in an apartment, we'll get you out." But like he kind of gave me that parachute a little bit, which honestly I tell people like was probably a lot more beneficial than if he had written me a check for $20,000 more to say, "Go get started and good luck." And so that was my advantage in this. And I think that's always interesting for everybody to know, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs talk about their business they started, but they don't like to talk about, the grandpa that died and left him $5 million to start some business, right? Which is fine, right? That they shouldn't be ashamed of that, but that's probably a big part of the story, right? So mine wasn't this big pot to start a business, but it was this like reassurance that if this failed, I could go back home and my life wasn't going to be ruined. I wasn't going to be in debt and all these things, which allowed me to kind of take a risk on a concept that, although in 2021, I imagine most of you in this room know what an escape room is, or hopefully have played one. Back then, nobody knew, right? Had any idea, especially in Waco. They'd look at you like I was speaking Chinese. Like they had no idea. They thought I built panic rooms like at their house. I would have people send me blueprints, and they were just like, "Hey, can you build this? I have a great backyard." And I'm like, "That's not what we do," And one time, the story gets a little on the edge, but just a couple had come in, I assume husband and wife, maybe not, and just literally handed me a $100 bill and just said, "Which room do we go in?" And I'm like, to do what? And they were like, "Well, we're here." And it was like, whoa, like, what do you think this is? And like, the wife had already wandered down the hallway and was like looking at the rooms, and the husband like turned cherry red, and he was like, "I'm so sorry," like, and took the money back. They left, and again, probably not his wife, but they left. And I was just like, what are we doing? No one gets what this is. And so it took a lot of time, prove the concept, prove the model. But because my dad had really given me that assurance, it was like, hey, we can take some risk. We hired, this was like first lesson I learned, we hired 11 people, and it was all part-time, workers, with the assumption that about 5 or 6 were just gonna quit within the first month, So I was like, then we'll have 5 or 6 really good workers. None of them quit. They loved being there, and it was like, crap, man, I can't afford all these workers. We weren't busy enough, but like, I kept paying them, and I kept having them come, and they would practice the rooms. Like we would do room competitions where they would go play the room. They knew them, but just like something. And I remember Jared, who's my partner, was like, "Dude, like we're eating through this payroll," and I was like, "You got to trust me. Like if we get busy, and I hope we do, like we're gonna need our staff, because the background of escape rooms, or the behind the scenes is, we're cluing your room. So someone is like watching you, not in a creepy way, but watching you on a camera while you're playing. And then if you ask for a hint or you get stuck, they can help you through it. So each room in essence needs an employee on it. And we had 4 rooms. So I'm like, dude, we're gonna need staff. And again, it looked really bad in the beginning because our payroll was so high. Then we hit, we opened up in September of 2015 was when we got started, really started running through rooms in November. First month was really slow. Then we hit Black Friday, was super busy, and then Christmas break. And so it was a good thing we had that staff there. But honestly, I don't know if I had like been really watching the budget and penny pinching, I may have just said, hey, we can only keep 2 of you because I really need this to work. I have no fallback. But kind of having that fallback plan of saying, hey, I can move back home, it was super helpful. So people always ask how we got started, what are the details there, and that's what it is. Having the faith that if it didn't work or if it did work, there was some fallback there. So Waco Escape Rooms, that December 2015 really launched us. We started on Lake Air. It's over by Target. It was our first location, and then within 3 months, it was November, and then in the end of February, we had made enough to pay ourselves back our initial 40. And then we had saved up enough to start looking downtown and for a location. And so downtown then, there were silos. They had just opened, but nothing else really was around downtown Waco. It was like a ghost town, really. And so we had the opportunity to move into a pretty big space, and so we jumped on that. The owner of the building had reached out to us and was like, hey, I just bought it. I'd love to have you guys here. Like, what do I need to do to get you here? Like, I played your rooms. They seemed great. You know, we had showed him a little bit of a P&L. At the time, we had no idea really how to put one together effectively, but he saw, okay, you're doing well. I think you can afford the rent. Like, come on downtown. And so we made that move. It took us 1.5 years for the construction after he said, yeah, it'll take about 90 days. Much longer than 90 days. But yeah, we moved downtown and really just it became, what we are now, which, the beginning was very Waco local centric. It was about 75%, 80% almost of all of our players were local to Waco, Hewitt, Woodway zip codes, which is like a suburb here. Now you look at it, it's like completely flipped. It's 75%, who knows what zip code, right? It's tourist. And so we still get about the same amount of locals, the same amount of students, MCC, Baylor, TSCC, but we get so many more people that are out of town now. So Waco Escape Rooms really became this it started as like this fun local thing, give you families and corporate outings, something else to go do. And it still is that, but now it's just like turned into, the second or third thing people do when they're in town for 3 days. When they go to Magnolia and they think it's a 3-day deal, and they're there for 3 hours, and they're like, shoot, like we have an Airbnb until Sunday. What else are we doing in this town? Waco Escape Rooms plus many other things are things that they'll go do. So within that journey, Rogue Capital started out of that purely as a kind of engine to get into other startups. Escape Rooms obviously is how I got started. There was, and I'll get into this here in a second, you can kind of see everything that we've started since then, but in the beginning it was just escape room in Waco, and then the next business was another escape room because that's what I was comfortable with and I understood the model and the business. So we started another escape room in San Marcos, but then after that, it became apparent like Rogue Capital really needed to be investment, partnership into other ventures that weren't escape rooms. And so as you can kind of see up here, this is over time, but axe throwing, Lemmy Soft Freeze, Bittersweet, which was a business started by a Baylor student that y'all maybe have had Bittersweet or not. She's not here anymore, but Nexus, Rogue Media Network, another escape room, the Pedal Tours. So all these things, Triple Win Waco is a nonprofit that we run, works with high school students to help them earn soft skills and hard skills. So learning how to work in a shop space, work with metal, welding, but also entrepreneurship too. So if they want to start a business, what does that look like? A lot of those students aren't necessarily your student that's maybe you're not going to go to Baylor or go to UT or an A&M, but they're going to get out of high school and just enter the workforce. Maybe they'll finish a trade skill at TSCC, associates at MCC or something, but they want to hit the ground running. And a lot of them are interested in entrepreneurship. And so they can make a pitch for seed funds. It's not a ton, it's about $1,000, $1,000 to $1,500. But to a high school student who's a senior that says, hey, here's $1,000, like I'll still be with you, I'll guide you. It's your business, you own 100% of it, but let's go and try to make some money. That's like life-changing, So that's Triple Win. That's not necessarily a business that Rogue owns, but we do a lot of work with Triple Win. So yeah, I mean that's kind of been the quick journey of it. Learned a lot of failures, probably more failures than successes, but you got to learn from that stuff, right? And I fear if people have had just like win after win after win after win, it's like I think you lose the idea of what really this all is, and the minute you get a loss, like are you going to be able to recover and come back from that? So yeah, I mean Waco's great. I think Waco, although I'm from Portland and we've started businesses in other cities, like Waco's home, and anytime we invest or partner with somebody, like I want them here at least to start. I want your business to be able to scale beyond Waco. It needs to. But I just think if you're starting out, like this is a great ecosystem and an environment to nurture, to learn, to make mistakes in Waco. That's probably the biggest thing. Like a mistake made here is not as bad as if you make it in Austin, or if you take a big swing and try to go to LA and do something and you miss. It's that could be it, or it could take you years to get out of that hole. In Waco, it's not quite as bad. And so that's why I was big proponent of this city. Obviously has a great university here, which has a ton of resources and really, really great professors and things like that. So that's kind of the quick version. Again, I could go into way more detail in different areas, but I'll throw it out to the room. If you guys have any questions or specifics about what I've just talked about, or want to know my favorite food, I don't really care. It's confession time, so I'm in the booth with you. We can talk. So does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Where do you get the ideas for the themes of the escape rooms?
The ideas for the escape rooms? Do you mean like the themes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jared, who I referenced earlier, he is my business partner, and Jared is so smart with the room design. So we're fortunate that we've been in this industry a long time, and Jared is a phenomenal room builder. There's an award called the Golden Lock, which I know none of you know what that is, but in the escape room world, big deal. If your room has a Golden Lock, it was voted on. There's not many, that's worldwide. There's about 10 given out every year, and Jared's won 2 of them. So he's phenomenal at what he does. And so having Jared being able to build out the room concepts, I get to help, right? I get to throw in some ideas here and there, and it's a collaborative effort, but Jared is the one that really comes up with all the puzzle sequences. Again, if you've played, the goal, right, is not to make you lose, right? Like that's not, I know a lot of people that play think we're like against you. We're not, but we want you to enjoy it. And the groups that either escape with a minute left or they lose on the final puzzle, like that's where we want you at. We don't want you blazing through the room in 30 minutes. And we don't want you like stuck on the second puzzle. I promise we don't laugh at you that often, but we want you in that sweet spot. So Jared is really good at knowing like puzzle sequence. He wants it to make sense, so there's like reasoning behind what you're doing. So yeah, he comes up with all of our themes, which is great. There's great models out there for franchises and things like that. We're grateful to not have to need to do that, right? We don't have to lean on a third party or somebody else for our room content. Jared and I can spend time on the phone talking through something new and come up with different ideas. So, but yeah, that's where the creative side comes from. Yeah.
What were your main forms of marketing?
The main forms of marketing for escape rooms or just in general? Escape rooms. So when we got started, the one misstep that I made, and again, this is not a knock on this magazine. It just wasn't our demographic. I'll say the bad one, and then I'll go into what works. But like the Waco Inn is a big deal in Waco. And as a Baylor student, I'd always heard about it. You go to Schmaltz's or other local restaurants, and you always see a copy of the Waco Inn. So I was like, oh, we need to get into the Waco Inn. Like everybody in Waco gets into this magazine. Well, and at the time this was a lot. It was like $650 for like a little quarter-page ad or a half-page ad, which was a lot. When we got started, it was like, geez, our marketing budget was like $. So it was like, so I remember I actually paid for that myself. It didn't come out of the companies. We didn't really have much to use that for. So it did not work. Like we had a little promo code, like, type in, I forget what it was, WER Waco Inn or something. It had like 1 redeem. And I was like, oh my gosh, like no one looked at this thing. And every time someone would come in, I'd be like, hey, where did you see us? They were like, oh, word of mouth. I'm like, did you read the Waco Inn? They're like, no. Like, and I was just like, oh, this was a waste of money. So really, back then, we all have our various opinions of Facebook. There was no Instagram really back then, so that's how long ago this was. The algorithms on Facebook, you could really manipulate them like extremely easily. You could make a post and just say, hey, like it, tag someone, share, and you get entered into a drawing, and we'll pick somebody random that gets a free room, right? And you guys, you still see these, but back then, man, you threw that up there, it went like wildfire. Like it just was on everybody's page, posted here and there. It was crazy. So you put a little bit of money into a Facebook boost. Back then, you got tons of value out of it. And so that was really what we leaned on pretty heavily. That and a ton of networking. Like And I was telling the group at lunch, like the thing I loved about the escape room business back then was like, that was all I focused on. There was no real capital, there was no pedal tours or nothing else. It was Waco escape room. So like I woke up, okay, what am I doing today for Waco escape? I go to bed, and I wasn't married, no kids, like I had a dog, but so like the responsibilities were not heavy in my life at that time. So that's what I enjoyed. So being able to network, Chamber of Commerce had like a networking forum where you could go and like stand up. It was a luncheon, but you would stand up and say like what business you were in. So like your 30-second elevator pitch, right? So you stand up and you have 30 seconds to tell your business. And so like I would always follow the real estate agent, the insurance broker, and I'm sorry, it's just like this boring. Like everybody knows that stuff. I stand up, I'm like, yeah, I own Waco escape rooms. Like literally every person just like stops what they're doing and is looking at me. And I'm like, yeah, we lock people in a room. You have 60 minutes to solve various puzzles. And they were just like, by the end of the luncheon, I would have a line of people like asking me to explain more. They probably thought I was doing a criminal activity is probably what it was. But there was a ton of interest there. So really those two things, social media, boosting specifically on Facebook, and networking, were the two big ones. Networking really hasn't changed. It's the same. Your social media, it's more like influencers now. There's, obviously Instagram has a big play into things as well, and different platforms. So you have to get a little bit more creative than here's a post, like it, you get entered into a competition. Like you got to get a little bit more into it, but that it's in a good way though. If you just take a little bit of effort and time, like it can be just as successful or better now than it was then. But those are really our two main ways we marketed it. Ooh, yes, I loved it. Okay, so I had our great graphics person threw this together really quick for me, and she was like, this doesn't look great. And I was like, I just need something. So I had done this, I had her ad, and then I had left off a business that is no longer in business because I'm like, well, I don't want to talk about that. And then, I'm like, Kathy told me confessions, it's confessions. So we got to talk about the bad stuff. So we added back the little floating door there at the bottom left, Escape Space Games. That one was specifically in San Marcos, Texas. And that was by far the biggest failure, and learned a lot from it. And so that started because we had started Waco Escape Rooms. It started going really well. And I was like, shoot, like I want to go do another one. And our partnership group, great when we got started. There were some frustrations and things. And I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing it with this crew. Like I want to maybe go do it by myself, And so somebody had, and that's really where Rogue Capital comes in, because it was like, well, I want to do this with Rogue. And I had an investor back home from Portland. It was a good friend of my mom's, a good friend of ours, had said, hey, here's like, how much did you need when you got started with Waco? And I was like, we had 40,000 got us going. And she's like, well, I'll give you 30 and let's go do one somewhere else. And so I was like, great. So I had like some seed money here. Let's go start another escape room. So we went to San Marcos, Texas. Everyone know where that is? No idea. South of Austin. At the time, it's grown a lot since then. But the Kyle, Buda, San Marcos, obviously South Austin. You get into New Braunfels and north side of San Antonio. Had about 2 million people in that range right there. And there was one escape room in San Marcos and one in New Braunfels, and that was it. And so I was like, man, we're going to dominate this market. Like, let's just go. And so I had an employee at the time at Waco who she was in seminary here. She's a little bit older. She was 26. Was one of our best employees we had. Super personable, understood the rooms. She couldn't really fix things, which happens a ton in escape rooms. Things get broken all the time. But she knew like really good ways how to work around a puzzle and have it still be somewhat functional for the group and still enjoy it. So I'm like, dude, she's like the triple threat, and she was from San Antonio. So she grew up in San Antonio, went to Texas State, which is in San Marcos. So I'm like, dude, this is a win. Like all I needed was somebody to run this location. Now I got it and we're golden, So we commit to San Marcos. And the first mistake was that I gave her like a really, really, really long leash, like too long. Like to the point, because I was just, we're going to scale this so fast. We're going to be in 10 cities in the next 2 years. and I got to focus on other stuff. So Kim, that was her name. I said her name. We set it up, and I basically said, go with it. You know, I'll check in with you. You know, every few days, whatever. You know, go get it. And first couple months were good, but it again was like I just wasn't on it enough, and so sometimes she would close early. Sometimes she wouldn't pick up the phone. Sometimes, you know, she would say, oh yeah, this is broken, I can't fix it. So instead of a workaround, just this room is blocked off for the next 2 weeks, like just stuff. And I was not on it enough because again, in San Marcos, you know, I can get there hour and 45 minutes if I hit Austin traffic right, but it's about a 2-hour drive there and then back. And so it's hard to get to another location, even if it's still in the same vicinity as where you're located at, or where you live. And that was, I couldn't get down there enough to like help, which is hurt. It ultimately really killed it because I was trying to scale this so fast, and I just thought if you just build it and have somewhat of a staff, it'll be fine. And I mean, we had Waco open for about 6 or 7 months. Like I hadn't even seen a full year of a business, which like, much like if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, like I always, you know, everyone always recommended, and I agree, like you should date for a year before you get engaged. Like see this person, how they are every season, you know, because in December they might be crazy or something. So it works the same with the business. You need to see it full year round. You know, when your peaks, when your valleys, you know, how do people respond to Christmas time versus the summer? You know, escape rooms, September, slowest month, it always is. Everyone's going back to school. Like you just prepare for it. So I hadn't worked up any of that data. I just said, let's just run. And so that killed. I was not ready to open a second location. And then the Lichpin, even though she wasn't doing a very good job anyway, it was 4th of July, which is one of our peak times in the summer. And we were training new staff, and she called me. It was a Saturday. I remember this. It was like 9:30 in the morning. Said, hey, I'm quitting. I was like, you're quitting? Like quitting what? Like I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, I'm leaving. Like I don't like what I'm doing. This isn't for me. You know, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. And I'm just like, what? Like I wasn't computing it. And so after we talked a little bit more and I couldn't convince her to stay, I just was like, well, you know, I accept your 2 weeks, like we'll figure it out. And she's like, no, like I'm not going in today. I was like, you're not going in? Like I was so frustrated. And so literally I'm on the phone with this new employee we had hired, coaching her through these rooms and how to do them, because she was brand new. She didn't even know what so it was like such a disaster. So like I go down there that week, I like meet all the new staff, I like introduce myself, you know, and we piecemealed it together for a little bit. I tripled down on it. Like we had a location, we had signed a lease. We had our staff doing a little bit better. Like we had recovered from when the manager had left, and there was another location that came available that I thought was like a better location, more visibility, yada, yada. So I'm like, let's go into that. Like that'll help the situation. Let's go get another building. And so that's what we did. So stupid. Like, so I was subleasing out office space in the previous location. Now in a new location, we rebuilt all the rooms, because I thought, oh, that's the problem. You know, that was not the problem. The problem was me, was the problem. But we just kept trudging forward. And so long story short, to your answer, there was 3 years of this, and it was tons of money, tons of more valuable, tons of time. I mean, again, I tell you that drive, man, I hate that drive. I hate that drive now. But just going down, and everything else suffers, right? I mean, we were doing a build out here in Waco, and I told you it took 1.5 years. It probably took that long because I just wasn't as available here to like push that project forward, because I was down there just like literally like I didn't want to fail. Like I hate that, like everybody, right? But at some point you got to know when to cut bait, and I did not understand that yet. I just said, let's throw more time and more money at it, and it just didn't. And so that was my biggest failure, and it taught me a lot. I mean, we haven't scaled anything outside of Waco, outside of the escape room we have in Portland. That works because my dad was there, right? So he could go check in on it. It's my hometown, so there's just many more people I can lean on. I know the ecosystem a lot better, so that's why that works. But that was big. I mean, I had all these ideas. Just we're going to own so many of these escape rooms, and we're just going to go crazy. So yeah, I wish I could take it back, but still know the things I learned from it. But again, that's not how that works. So yeah, so I had her put it back on there because I'm like, I think that question will get asked, and I want to talk about it. We had started a networking group here called 1 Million Cups, which happens in downtown Waco, and so many times the model of it is business owner comes and presents their business about 7-9 minutes, and then the crowd gets to Q&A and ask questions. And it's always good stuff. And I'm like, I just want to do something where like you come in and you like literally, not in a negative way, but like talk about the bad stuff. Like these are the pitfalls, So my advice, my confession would be like if you land on a great concept, which is still hard to do on your first swing, like I should have just been happy with that. Like take time to get through it. See it open for a year, raise more funding, raise capital, do better market research on where you're going to do your second location. Don't just blindly go because you think you have it figured out. And sometimes it might work. Like I'm sure there's many examples where that does work, but most of the time it doesn't. So that was the biggest boo-boo. Yeah.
How did an escape room, how did you struggle with like customer retention and keeping it new and like fresh?
Sure. So we have one room. I'll take that back. We have 2 rooms that have been around since we opened. So they've been 6 years. They've been Waco room and dinner for 2. They still are booked out like every Saturday. Dinner for 2 is just a 2-person room. So it doesn't make a ton of money, but when you look at it, it takes forever. Like if you put a number to it and said 10,000 people, it takes a long time for 10,000 people to play through one room, right? So, but Waco room, again, is like the beginner room. So a lot of new players, never done a room before. That's like the one we steer them to. So those 2 have never been replaced. Now we are doing, COVID changes things in a lot of different ways, but every year was a brand new room, was kind of our concept and our model. There's a company out of Nashville that, like I said, is kind of the capital of escape rooms in the U.S. They don't like ever change their rooms. So I was like, well, shoot, they must know something. So instead of putting a ton of effort and time and capital into turning rooms over, it was like, well, let's just keep promoting and doing things. And my partner Jared and I just said, like, if we ever get to a point where we're constantly looking at this data, and if one room starts to really deteriorate, meaning like there's just not as many plays anymore, then that's going to tell us it's time to go. And that's just it doesn't get to that point. I think timing plays a big part too. We hit Waco right where it's in this transition period of being kind of a little sleepy town with a really cool university to being a little bit of a busier town with a cool university, and now this big tourism draw. And we have a location that was a good spot. We were one of the first things to be open downtown when Magnolia started to be open. And so, like I told you earlier, when you get that flip of locals versus tourists, you have a tourist that comes in, they've never played any of your rooms, so it doesn't make sense to turn over a lot of rooms. Now, the local side does suffer a little bit because we have a lot of people that have played every room and they wait. They're just like, it's been years. Like, it's like, I get it. I know we're getting there. But so what we did, and we had this planned, it was a citywide game, which we've done a few on campus now. We did one in downtown for new students here at Baylor. And then we've run 3 of them for the city. And what it is, it's an app that we developed that we can build out puzzles on the app that you solve games there, and then it sends you to locations. So it's like a little bit like a scavenger hunt with a little bit of escape room feel. And so our first game we developed out was launching March of 2020. That was our opening. We had sold all these tickets, and then of course we couldn't do it because of COVID. But we then brought it back in June of 2020, and it was successful. I mean, people were able to get out of the house. They did it in their car, right? We told them only do it with the people you're like shelter in placing with or whatever, but be in your car, go around Waco, and it was a fun alternative to it. But it was kind of like here locals, like here's something for you, because I know we're not turning these rooms out quick enough. Here's like some other side content that you can do. And there's still tons of people in town that have not played an escape room, not just us, but like any in general. So it just takes a long time to churn through it. When a room is maximum 6 to 10 people. Your Saturdays, you get about 9 plays on a Saturday. I mean, that's like 90 people. So it takes a long time to get to a point when you have so many people that have played through it. There was a company in town. We actually had a competitor for a while. They were in Robinson, Texas. They kind of went in at it a different approach. Like you do with competitors, you try to figure out like, okay, what are they doing? And now what do I need to do to be different than them? And so what they did was, we're going to do a new room every 3 months. Like new content. And people, I'm sure, loved that because there was new content, but he just bled through all of his funding trying to do that. And you don't get it back quick enough. Now, you could do a really crappy room and spend $1,000 on it, and people will know that. He was not doing that, he's a good room builder, but there was just too much money being spent there. So they closed that location. They built a big one out in Killeen. That's kind of where they consolidated to. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not. But
how crippling was COVID for y'all?
oof, how crippling! Like, I think when you're crippling, you're still alive. So we were worse than that. No, we didn't die. We had a pulse. It was bad. I mean, there are a lot of industries. Food. Let's take food for example, right? What was the food pivot? If you owned a restaurant or a food truck, what did you start doing during COVID? To go, right? To go. And grab and go is already super profitable business model. That's bittersweet. Grab and go, right? The owner and I, we just didn't want a sit down deal. Something that's grab, get it, go. That's what people want. Tons of revenue there to be had. The model works really well. So businesses and food restaurants pivoted to something that they probably should already be doing in some way, shape, or form. So it still was bad, but I was doing a operator development program at the time with Chick-fil-A, and COVID, it just kept on trucking for Chick-fil-A, right? There was no dip, really. I mean, it just kept on going. So escape rooms, there's not a grab and go model to go into a room where you're touching things, where you're in a room maybe with people you don't know, breathing the same air, so it's complete shutdown. So yeah, that was hard. We had our Citywide game we did in June, so that was some revenue. And people that had bought tickets for that were very grateful and were like, hey, we're not going to go to this, but you don't have to refund us. You can. So I was like, okay, thank God. We had a couple staff. We have a lot of staff, but during COVID, it was like, hey, there's 2 people we cannot lose. If we lose them, and then this turns and we can open back up, we're going to be starting over. And so there were 2 employees we really had to take care of. But everybody else obviously was like, well, we'll get you back when we're open. But we pivoted to online games, which are fine. It brought in enough to pay rent, because rent was still due, guys. So always buy your building. That's my advice to you. You still have to. There's still some things there too, but rent was still due, and we had to afford our employees that we wanted to keep. So the live online games brought in enough to get us through. We reopened in July of 2020, July 4th. But even with that, we had so many regulations that were self-imposed. Waco, even at the time, downtown did not have a mask mandate. We did, and people hated it. We got destroyed. We were called Nazis. I can't tell you all the things we were called. But when you're putting these people in a small room, I know it sucks, but it was the best way to do this and not be labeled as this super spreader business or something. So we reopened, but the lobby wasn't open. The bathrooms weren't really open unless it was an emergency. It was rough. And so it was very touch and go, really probably until December of 2020, when again, Christmas break hit. People were tired of being cooped up with just their family and friends or whatever. So they came back out at Christmas break, and I think people had, I don't think really vaccines were really a thing yet, but people were just whatever, we're going to go play or do something. It wasn't just escape rooms, but other things. And so really weathering that storm, but it was hard. It paused so much. It paused new room builds. It paused potential new partnerships and locations. Row Capital, it was we weren't investing or doing anything with any business or any person because we just didn't know. You could look at certain things and make a guess about okay, based on what's happening in the world, this type of business is going to really take off. But it was just hard, like, trying to figure what's the risk and if this doesn't work. So yeah, it was brutal. Axe throwing, Waco Axe. We opened February 14th of 2020. So our first 28 days were like incredible. The revenue was like, dude, this is gonna work. And then of course we had to shut down and pedal tours and all these things. So yeah, it was definitely a wake up call. But staying kind of in a lean model helped kind of survive through that time period, because I think if you had taken big swings and then had to shut down, it was rough for a lot of people. So yeah, I mean we've weathered that storm. We've kept on going, and I think now we've seen people like missed out on all these things that they did, and now like want to come back and experience them. So, and during that time, like we had bought all this stuff to buy a new room, or to build out a new room. So that was nice. We'd already spent that money. We weren't open, but then it did give us time to like rebuild some stuff. So there was some positives, I guess, out of it, but not as many to outweigh the bad. So. Yes.
As you're involved with so many different types of businesses and things, and have a family,
Yeah.
What are you learning about delegating responsibility? Or do you have any tips?
Oh, yes, great question. Great question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these businesses on here, maybe with the exception of like one or two, began either an investment stage or funding or creation, ideation. We started them, all those things when I was like single, had all the time in the world, could stay up till 5 a.m. It was fine. I could do all these things with my time. Then, you meet somebody that you're like, oh, I think I love this person, and then you're going to get married, and then you start doing foster care, and now you have kids and dogs and all these things. The thing that suffers the most is time, right? So for the first few months, maybe more of our marriage, it was like, I'm still living this life that I was living before, and that just doesn't work. It just doesn't. So time becomes the greatest resource, and a lot of people say that. That's not new news. So it comes down to systems in place, procedures, and people. And so for the escape rooms, and it kind of funnels into pedal tours, axe throwing, Nexus with the model, like they're not too different from how an escape room works, and the procedures and systems we had in place. So a lot of it is kind of plug and play a little bit. So that stuff really just falls into having a tremendous staff and people that understand the goal and what you're trying to do, and being on the same page. It's communication. So escape rooms, we've had the same GM. It started with me day one, right? Hired her. She's seen, when I was there every day for a year and a half, she saw like the expectations, and she's incredible. Without her, the wheels fall off. So, my dad in Portland, having him there, he's not there cluing rooms and stuff, and we have a really good manager there too. But again, like they know the system, and they fall into what works and what doesn't. A business, and I'll mention Rogue Media because the gentleman that runs that business is in this room right now. But that's one of our newest ventures, and it's a podcasting network. We do some video work too and things like that. But we produce, edit, host original content, or people can bring an existing podcast to us and we can host it. We have a studio downtown. It's next to the escape room. A business like that, where like I am very little involvement besides like my meetings with Mike and stuff like that and our team. It goes because Mike's incredible, right? So like you can't start another business or go into something else without your team, or if you're going to run it yourself. So it's one of the two. You got to pick. So if you don't have the time and you're trying to do other things, it comes down to your partners or to the staff you hire. And a lot of that comes into what is your hiring process? Are you a good evaluator of talent and people? Do you understand their strengths, their weaknesses? Like, don't kill me. I'm not an Enneagram person, but like knowing things like that, personality types, like that's huge. That's huge. So, and Mike is uber talented and he's passionate about podcasting. If Mike was like, well, I love tacos, I just want to do that. You do love tacos, but he wouldn't do a good job with Rogue Media, right? So you got to find people that obviously love that industry. Axe throwing, same thing. There's a guy, Thomas Ellis. He's like our main partner with it, owner. He is incredible. Without Thomas, it doesn't work. So, and the flip side can happen too, right? With a business that's run by somebody that's a partner, if they're not into it as much, or if they're not, we all make mistakes, so it's not on one person, but if they're not pulling their weight, or if they make, they don't want to contribute as much and all these things, the business suffers too, because the time, like I can't just jump in as much as I want to, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I could do this so much better. You can't like rely on that because it's unrealistic if you're going to do these many things. So it comes down to people. You got to have good partners. The two things we mentioned at lunchtime, like in my opinion, the two most important things: operating agreement. So if you start a business and you have partners, which a lot of times your first business is usually at least with one partner, or maybe it's not, but if it is, spend time with that operating agreement. What are you doing? What are you doing? Everybody loves when it's successful and you're making money and you're scaling and you're growing and all these things. There aren't issues. When you hit a problem, everyone's pointing fingers, right? So you got to have something to go back to that says, hey, 2 years ago when we were on cloud 9 about this is what you said you were doing. This is what I said I was doing. I'm doing it. You're not doing this. So that's huge to have that. And then having a clear exit strategy. Are you running this out for 5 years and then selling? Is this something that you and your partner or you yourself are just going to run for the rest of your life and do that? And that's fine. Are you going to seek more investors and try to make more money that way and sell off shares? Okay, great. But what is it? And if you don't know what that is, a lot of these times the direction of all these businesses don't go the right way because you didn't do proper work in the beginning. So I don't know. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Someone over here. All the questions are over here. Okay.
You run as a holding company, or are you more like a partner, consulting company?
Yeah, so it's more of like a partnership, equity stake in all the businesses there. What I've learned is that not every business needs the same thing, right? So a business may need, your most common is I just need capital, right? You go to somebody, say, I need $30,000, I'll give you 20% or whatever, it's more in depth than that, but in a nutshell. Somebody else may say, hey, I have a great concept already, I'm already in business. They may need some capital to expand or grow, but really I need help with blank, like operational, or I hear you have a building and there's vacancy here. Instead of paying rent, how about you come in as a partner, things like that. So it's more the need of the business. And in the beginning, when I had time, that was like a valuable resource that I could give out. So it's like, here's 20,000 to start, but also let me give you my time too to make sure that we guide this in the right direction. Nowadays, that's not, I can't give that, right? We can say, here's some startup capital, but I can't just jump in and do that day to day with you. So a lot of times those ventures are just ones I can't pursue because it just takes too much time away. But so it really just depends on the partnership. So Rogue, we have some properties that the Rogue Capital holds that's a part of that. But as far as actual a holdings company, because all of these businesses, a few of them are like a Rogue business. So, but Pedal Tours has a different set of partners, totally different partnership agreement. Waco Axe, different partnership agreement. Escape Space, different partnership. So if you have a parent company, for the most part, the parent company is the same ownership structure as your sub companies. Rogue is not. It's not developed in that way. So it can still act as an investment vehicle and a partnership and things like that. But it's not every business here isn't. It's all weighed a little differently. If that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. How many of you in here are OSO launch? Is this everybody? No. Is anybody in here OSO launch? 1, 2, just 2? I have a prize for you if you come up here. I got a prize for you. I got you, Kathy. I got you. Okay, I got 2. All right, thanks guys. I appreciate the time.